Hi, Caden. This is Mick Wingert. First, I apologize that it's taken me so long to get back to you. Number two, I also intended to type out answers for you, but it looks like I'm going to have to just answer your questions here on an audio file just because it'll be more convenient and less time consuming to type, and that way I can get you my information and my answers to your interview questions a little faster. All right, so let us just jump in. All right, let me just pull that up. Stand by. So your first question was, what made me want to get into voice acting? I grew up a theater kid in Central California, and I just had a very, very vivid imagination. I loved cartoons growing up. And so, being a theater kid, I did stage and whatnot. And being Central California, there was no entertainment industry to speak of other than stage plays and musicals, that kind of thing. So, I did little performer workshops and community theater, but it wasn't like I was an industry kid. I wasn't auditioning for Nickelodeon shows or anything crazy like that. I think, I majored in mass communication and journalism in college so that I could get a real job. And it was, trying to figure out whether I wanted to be an actor or not. But after graduation and after kind of working in the corporate world for a little while in advertising and marketing for a now defunct department store chain, I realized, corporate life was really not my strong suit, and I did wanted to get back to this acting thing, and I thought at the time that my strongest foot forward would be to do voices because when I was a kid, um, I was always doing impressions of cartoon characters and, yucking it up with family at holiday dinners and that kind of thing. And it was almost always about my impressions, and they were terrible impressions, and none of them were original. Most of the impressions I did were of the cartoons I watched as a kid, um, and or, emulating family members' impressions. I had this one uncle, or I have this one uncle, he's still with us, who did a lot of impressions at holiday dinners, and I would try to do what he does, and picked up his voice acting chops. Now he was just doing it for family entertainment. He was just doing it to as a parlor trick and to have fun at Thanksgiving and Christmas. But I was like, wow, I could do this. Like there's a market for this. By the time I had graduated college, I realized that there were people who did this for a living. This was the This was the era when Tiny Toon Adventures, Animaniacs, Kids WB was doing a lot of really prescient animation that was appealing to an older audience like myself. I was late high school, early college, and I was noticing the cast list at the end of each of these shows, and realizing, wow, there are people who do this for a living, and I've seen these names before, and I think I'll see them again. So yeah, that really sparked my interest as a career goal. And like I said, after I graduated college and decided to get back into acting, I was like, I remember late high school, early college age, seeing all these people who do this for a living. Maybe that's where I should be an actor. I was not confident in my actual acting chops and getting on camera and doing gritty emotional drama. I was just, A, it wasn't my strong suit, and B, I found it really intimidating to be that vulnerable and raw. So I thought, well, this is a way to be a good performer without having to be, emotionally out there. And, dirty little secret, coming full circle here on this side of it, I now realize that actually what makes me good at voice acting is the acting part of it, and how when I have dived into that and let that be more real and more raw and more, cut loose, the better my performances are, even when I am doing a character voice, especially when I'm doing a character voice, actually. So, my high school understanding of it, what got me to the dance was, the prospect of doing impressions and fun voices, silly accents and things like that. But really what's kept me in this has been the pursuit of the craft of make-believe, telling people stories by portraying them. And that's a really fascinating process. I hope that answers question number 1. Moving on. Question number 2 would be, what was your favorite role that you've played? Oh my gosh, that's like asking me to choose amongst my kids, and I'm not the only actor who's ever said that, and I won't be the only actor who's ever said that. I have different favorites for different reasons. The first one that comes to mind, but isn't my premier favorite, he just happens to be the first one that comes to mind, is Tony Stark. Playing Tony Stark for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, for What If, as well as for Marvel Animation, for the last 5 or so years, lets me play the cool guy I never was. Tony Stark will always be the coolest guy who walks into any room in Marvel. And to that end, I was never the coolest guy to walk in any room. And so it's really fun to play rich, powerful, cool, aloof, clever, witty. And writers have a great time writing Tony Stark, and I have a great time performing it. Plus, I get to walk in the shoes of, even if I don't fill them very well, I get to walk in the shoes of Robert Downey Jr., who was the consummate Tony Stark. And created that character beyond the comics and in a way more fleshed out than the comics for a whole generation of people. So that's always fun. But I also would say that my favorite character to play is Po from Kung Fu Panda, because it's literally my story. Some lovable, overweight schlub who's way into his fandom is like chosen to be a superhero. Like, he's way into superheroes, kung fu heroes, and he's chosen to be the dragon warrior. Like, I always relate when I'm at cons and stuff, I relate the story that the first Comic-Con I ever went to was in 2003, and I went as a fan. And I met voice actors at various different booths or panels and whatnot. And Comic-Con was different in 2003. It was a lot. It was getting bigger every year, but there was still a lot of personal interaction you could have with people. And then the next time I was able to go to a Comic-Con was because I was an invited guest of Nickelodeon as the star of Kung Fu Panda Legends of Awesomeness. And I was on a panel with John DiMaggio and James Hong. Among others. Like, you talk about wish fulfillment. My story was Poe's story, and so he's a favorite. I love playing the Joker. I cosplayed the Joker before I knew what cosplay was. I was just celebrating Halloween, but at high school in 1990, right after the first Batman film came out, and I made my own Joker costume from scratch and love that character. So being able to play him on Batwheels is a dream come true. It's literally the boyhood dream come true metaphor that has lived itself out in my life. I posted on Instagram one time how it started and how it's going, and I posted a photo of myself in my 10th grade Joker costume, and then a picture of the art from the show as just an example of it coming to fruition, and that was really cool. I feel very humbled about that. So I have lots of favorites. I really do. They're all kind of my favorite in a certain way, but I think those 3 that mentioned should check the box for you. And then, what are some advantages and disadvantages of my career? One of the advantages is there are opportunities to make money if you have other skill sets because you have a certain amount of flexibility with being a voice actor. But you also, it can lead to other things. I'm a voice acting coach because I'm good at teaching. But I'm not an elementary or high school teacher, which means I'm not locked into teaching in a structured school system. I can run my own coaching business. I can charge my own rate. I have flexibility for that. But it becomes another source of income that is not about me getting in the booth and recording. Um, Other advantages are, with as I get to play roles of greater and greater notoriety, I get to, I get to experience relationships with fans. Like I get to interact with people in fandom communities. When you quote this, let me retract that. It's not that I get to experience relationships with fans, especially in this day and age where there's so many stories of people like abusing that and actually building parasocial relationships. That's not what I mean. I mean experiencing the fandom communities en masse at, say, conventions or in interactive live stream chats or that kind of thing in a very public forum. I am not talking about personal, private relationships with fans at all. I mean specifically engaging with being interviewed like this and being invited to various different anime and pop culture conventions. And not only can that be a source of revenue for a person like me, but also it's a great opportunity to get in touch with the people who are consuming my performance and get a vibe for how it's impacting out there. So that's really good. One of the disadvantages is it takes a lot of sacrifice to make a career in any creative field. As a capitalist society, we are trying to monetize a creative art form, and it doesn't monetize well or perfectly. And when I started in 2004, there weren't things like Patreon, or at least I didn't know about them. Patreon or some of these other pay-to-play sites. YouTube was still in its, young childhood. I wouldn't say infancy, but definitely in its young childhood. It was, when YouTube was mostly about cat videos. And so that making a career out of being an influencer or a social media person or a YouTuber or a content maker, creator wasn't really an option. So we all had day jobs and we all tried to get our auditions whenever we could, and we were hoofing it to find agents, and that still definitely goes on. But the landscape is different now. The landscape is different. In fact, when people ask me, how do I go about becoming a voice actor, I usually point them in the direction of become a content creator of some kind and get out there and do it. There's more opportunity for voice acting between independently developed projects and Kickstarters and stuff people are just creating, and things like fan dubs and the fan community where we love, we love the Flash, and so because we love the Flash as a character, we want to tell this story from the comics because it wasn't ever actualized or it wasn't adequately actualized on the TV show or in a film or what have you. Or we're anti-Ezra Millers, so we want to do our own version of that. And that's opportunity to perform. That's a version of community theater, right? So you may never make it to Broadway and do Meet Me in St. Louis, the revival on Broadway, but you can do your local community theater version of Meet Me in St. Louis and have a really fun time. So to that end, like one of the disadvantages is economic instability, needing to accommodate what is seen as a hobby while you are trying to make a living, keeping the lights on. Another one of the disadvantages is that, especially for somebody who wants to do animation like I do and or video games, there is still a strong preconceived notion of being Los Angeles local, at least until you're a proven commodity. A major disadvantage is that you have to live in one of the most expensive areas in the world, at least until studios and content makers know your name and skill set. When they do know that stuff, you are more free to live where you want to live because so much more is gone to remote recording, especially since the pandemic. But again, to talk about dirty little secrets, the pandemic only revealed what has been true for the last 10 years, that all of this is able to be done remotely because of the technology that's out there. High fidelity sound recording no longer requires a separate ISDN line. It no longer requires anything more than the right software, and hasn't for a long time. But again, studios and other organizations get set in their ways, and it becomes essential for the person who's not established to really make a name for themselves locally, so that they can get FaceTime, so that they can be there at the drop of a hat when necessary. It's not always necessary, but when it is, it is. And anything that would keep you from being able to be there in person at very little notice can become a detractor to building a career in this, which again affects financial stability. I hope that answers that question. And then number 4, if I wasn't a voice actor, what would I be doing? Gosh, I'd be voice directing, because I love directing and working with students. I'd be a teacher. I'd be a game show host. There'd be some sort of acting I'd be doing, I'm sure. But if acting was completely off the table, I would continue to be a coach, mentor, and teacher to students. The thing I understand the best and that I've spent the most time working on is voice acting. So that's, I think, where I would stay, is being trying to be a world-renowned voiceover coach that's in demand. But also, like, I could see myself as, a speech therapist, speech pathologist, or an educator that works in speech and communications. I often thought about going back to school for a master's or doctorate in communications to teach at the university level. There's a certain stability in that, and it certainly checks a few boxes of areas of interest for me, as well as areas of skill. But the good news is I've gotten to my irreducible minimum, and at my irreducible minimum is voice acting, and it is still an option for me. So even if I was a university professor, I'd probably be doing those fan dubs and those independent video projects and everything else, because I can't not do it. That's what I mean by irreducible minimum. At my core, there is a voice actor. And I would say that to anybody who's looking at this as a career, is if it's not part of your irreducible minimum, if you really can be happy doing anything else, if you have areas of interest that you are equally as passionate about and or equipped for, then go do those things. Because this is a really hard lifestyle, especially when it comes to financial insecurity and competition for jobs. And one of the negatives I didn't get into, but can mention now because I'm thinking of it, is this sense of always having to face rejection, having to face constant rejection. And rejection that's not always based on you, but that your ego will always make about you. Oh, what didn't they like about my performance? Oh, so-and-so, the casting director, hates me. Or I just can't work for this person. What do they have against me? And it may be that they don't have anything against you at all. You're just not in right now. Or you weren't the right person for this role. Or you were the right person for this role, but you didn't have enough star power or a big enough Twitter following. Although since Elon took over Twitter, things are all up in the air, but you didn't have a big enough Instagram following, and so on and so on and so on. So, in terms of that, there's a constant negative effect to working in the entertainment industry. It's a use them up, chew them up and spit them out kind of business. And if you don't know that going in, that is a really hard lesson to learn, and hard on your psyche and hard on your emotional health. So that's a downside of this industry. Now, thankfully, voice actors as a community are so much more affirming, celebratory, and inclusive than their on-camera counterparts in my experience. But there's still some of that. I mean, you still have to face rejection every day, and you still have to wonder why such and such a talent booked something and you didn't, or why all your friends are in this game, but your auditions have never hit for it. That kind of thing. That's happened to me specifically. I'll be like, wow, a lot of people I know are in Borderlands or in Genshin or whatever, and I'm not. Why? Why was I not in this game? It feels like it's the it game to be a part of. And, you just have to take those as they come and remember, it's not about you. It may not have been anything that you did or didn't do in your audition. It may just be that this was the cast for a number of reasons, and it has nothing to do with you. They were the right people at the right time. They had the right sound. They sounded closer to what the writer heard in their head or whatever. So it can be a real mental challenge. Anyway, I hope that answers all your questions, Caden. Thanks again for being patient. I hope that you find this informative and that I got it to you in time to transcribe it for whatever document or project you're turning in. All the best to you, and thanks again for thinking of me. Ciao.